And let's see if we can't finish this, the second chapter of The Spell of the Sorcerer's Skull. Johnny has held on to that skull and been very protective of it. He and Fergie are doing their Latin homework, and they both see a jack-o'-lantern in the professor's window. Johnny decides to ask the professor about the jack-o'-lantern, and the professor kind of acts like Johnny's crazy. And we'll pull back a little bit because we cut off in the last video to the beginning of that paragraph. Johnny opened and shut his mouth a couple of times, but he couldn't think of anything to say. He sighed weakly, walked around the car, and climbed in. As they drove down the street, he sat staring numbly at the dashboard. He felt dazed. Was he going out of his mind? No, that couldn't be, because Fergie had seen the jack-o'-lantern too. With a sick feeling, he realized there was another possible explanation. The professor might be losing his mind. Johnny had heard sometimes old people got very scatty and did peculiar things, and even forgot the names and faces of people they had known all their lives. But the professor did not act like someone who had lost his marbles. He was behaving just like his usual cranky but likable self. It was all very strange. Again, Johnny had the urge to tell the professor about the vision or dream or whatever it was that he had seen at the Fitzwilliam Inn. He opened his mouth to speak, but suddenly he felt that shortness of breath, that tightening of the chest, and he decided that he had better think of other things until it was time to get out of the car. That evening after school, Johnny and Fergie went to the movies together. This was a Friday night habit of theirs, and they went in good weather or bad, or lousy movies or good ones. On this particular Friday, they happened to land a really rousing slam-bang pirate movie. They always sat way down in front and munched popcorn and made smart remarks until the usher came down and threatened to throw them out if they didn't shut up. After the show, they walked the dark, windy streets. Fergie and Johnny talked about the professor and the problem of the jack-o'-lantern that was or was not there. And he claimed that he never made one. And he got really huffy and acted insulted when I said he did, Johnny was saying as they stood at a corner waiting for the light to change. But you saw it, didn't you? Yeah, I guess. But you saw it, didn't you? Yeah, I guess so, said Fergie uncertainly. He wrinkled up his nose, as if he were smelling something unpleasant. Fergie liked mysteries, but he always felt they ought to have nice, reasonable explanations. Sure there was a jack-o'-lantern, he added, as the light changed and they started across the street. And I'll tell you how come the old so-and-so made it. He got a little schnockered, and he carved it out, just for fun. And then, when you asked him about it, he got embarrassed and tried to lie his way out. How's that for an answer to your great big fat mystery, huh? Johnny gave Fergie a dirty look. He liked the professor a lot, and he didn't like hearing anybody call him an old so-and-so. Also, to tell the truth, he did not think much of Fergie's wonderful explanation. The professor doesn't ever get drunk, said Johnny, frowning stubbornly. And besides, when I asked him about the jack-o'-lantern, he didn't act embarrassed. He really didn't. He just looked at me like I was from outer space, like he'd never heard anything so unbelievable in his life. Fergie stopped and picked up a rock that lay on the sidewalk. He threw it across the street, and it pinged loudly as it bounced off a fire hydrant. Maybe he's a real good actor, said Fergie, who could be just as stubborn as Johnny when he thought he was right. He's not that good an actor, muttered Johnny, digging his hands deep into the pockets of his jacket. Well, then what the heck was the darned thing? Exclaimed Fergie impatiently. Was it a mirage, like the kind they have out in the desert? It had to be real, it just had to be, and don't tell me it was a ghost, that's the next thing you'll be trying to say. Silence fell. The two boys trudged moodily along, staring at the sidewalk. 2 blocks passed, and then they reached the Main Street Bridge. Fergie lived over in Cranbrook, on the other side of the bridge. Fergie threw a shamefaced glance at Johnny. He wanted to stay friends, but he was beginning to be afraid that he'd hurt Johnny's feelings by telling him that his ideas were dumb. Look, said Fergie hurriedly, I gotta go, but we can talk about this later. Maybe we can figure out what really happened. Yeah, maybe, muttered Johnny. He wanted to be alone so he could think things out. See you around. Fergie turned and walked off into the darkness. Johnny trotted across Main Street and started climbing the steep hill toward home. The wind had let up, and the night was still. Up ahead, off to the right, loomed the dark shadow of the professor's house. Johnny glanced up, and his jaw dropped. There, leering down at him from a second-story window, was the jack-o'-lantern. Fear clutched at Johnny's heart. He told himself that He was being silly, and this was the professor's idea of a joke. For a long time, Johnny just stood there gazing like a hypnotized person at the sinister grinning mask. Then abruptly he made a decision. He had to find out what was going on. Johnny raced across the street and cut through a gap in the spirea hedge that bordered the professor's front yard. Nervously he scanned the front of the house. Overhead the lantern burned, but the downstairs windows were dark. He could see that the window over the porch was lit, that that was the professor's study, where he often was at this time of night. Warily Johnny crept forward. Acorns and twigs crunched under his feet, and he stumbled over a dead limb. But he righted himself and moved steadily on. He could see that the back porch light was on, and there was a lamplit in the kitchen, too. Johnny paused. Why was he so tense? Blood was pounding in his temples, and he kept expecting to see horrible things come rushing at him out of nowhere. But nothing happened, and he edged closer to the back porch. He tried the screen door. It was unlocked. So was the inside door. The professor's kitchen was in its usual messy state, with unwashed dishes piled in the sink. A saucepan with something black burned inside it was sitting on the stove, and the kitchen table was covered with flour. An old-fashioned Waterbury clock ticked quietly on a shelf above the spice rack. "Hello?" Johnny called, cupping his hands to his mouth. "Professor, are you home?" No answer. Johnny felt embarrassed. He shouldn't be barging in on his old friends this way, but he just had to find out about that lantern. Also, for no reason that he could put his finger on, there was a growing fear that something bad might have happened to Professor Childermass. Johnny walked through the first floor of the house, peering into empty rooms and calling the professor's name. At the bottom of the stairs he paused again. Should he go up? Maybe the professor was just out for an evening stroll. He might come back at any minute, or he might be upstairs in his study correcting papers or reading. Johnny gritted his teeth. One more try first. Cupping his hands, Johnny bellowed up the stairs. "Hey, Professor, are you home?" Again, no answer. Clenching his fists resolutely, Johnny strode up the steps. At the top, he paused a second longer, and then headed for the professor's study. The door was ajar, and the desk lamp was on. Everything looked perfectly normal. The professor's desk was littered with blue examination books, and the stuffed owl on the pillar in the corner glowered indignantly at Johnny. But the desk chair was empty. As Johnny moved farther into the room, he saw some things that astonished and disturbed him. On the desk pad, next to the pile of exam books, was a cup of coffee. Steam curled up from it. It was still hot, and perched on the lip of a glass ashtray was one of the professor's black and gold Balkan Sobrane cigarettes. It was half-smoked and still lit. The pungent aroma of cigarette tickled Johnny's nostrils. Had the professor been called out of the room a second or two ago? If so, where was he? Johnny went out into the hall. He glanced toward the bathroom, but the door was open, and from where he was standing he could see that the room was dark. He was really panicking now. He could feel his palms sweating. He crept to the entrance of the professor's bedroom, and, with a sudden motion, flung the door inward. It banged loudly against the wall with a violent noise. The violent noise almost made Johnny scream. But he got control of himself and flipped on the overhead light. Nobody there. Johnny braced himself for the next step. He had to go down to the room where the jack-o'-lantern was. Nervously he clenched and unclenched his fists and tried to calm himself. Why was he so scared to do this? With a grim frown on his face, he strode boldly down the hall and stopped outside the massive paneled oak door. With a loud exclamation, he seized the knob and twisted it. The door flew open, and Johnny's hands fumbled for the light switch. A harsh glare flooded the room. In it was a gloomy mahogany bed, a marble-topped bureau, and a chair with a caned seat. White lace curtains hung on the room's only window. There was no jack-o'-lantern. There wasn't even a table or stand on which one could have been standing. Nor was there the smell of hot pumpkin and candle wax that hung in the air where a jack-o'-lantern had been burning. The only smell in the room was the wonderful aroma of balsam fir needles that rose from a pillow-shaped white packet that lay on top of the bureau. A canoeing scene was picked out in green thread on the surface of the cloth packet, along with the words, "Welcome to New Hampshire." Johnny fought down the shapeless fear that was in his mind. At the far end of the narrow room, next to the window, was a closet door. Could there be a jack-o'-lantern in there? Maybe one of those new plastic ones with a light bulb in it? That would explain why, halfway to the window, Johnny froze. He had seen something out of the corner of his eye, a sudden image in the small rectangular mirror that hung over the bureau. He turned and looked. In the mirror he saw the professor's face, looking haggard and disheveled. His eyes pleaded, and as Johnny watched, his lips formed silent words. "Help me." And that is the end of Chapter 2.